Todas las grandes ideas son el resultado del deseo de cumplir los sueños, de encontrar respuestas a incógnitas que antes se creían indescifrables. Son fruto de la fascinación por lo desconocido y la pasión de mentes brillantes dispuestas a conquistar las estrellas. Las grandes ideas son la huella indeleble de la existencia de la humanidad. No es solo lo que haces por ti, es lo que haces por el futuro. Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana.
Good morning to all the audience in Latin America, and good afternoon to all the audience in Germany and also in Europe. Thank you so much for being with us in a new session of the HEPCoPa Lecture Series. I am Rafael Calles, Head of International Affairs at UPB Bucaramanga, and it's an honor as each Wednesday to present this interesting initiative that we are delivering with the support of the University of Potsdam. So, in terms of context, as you know, the HEPCoPa project is a bilateral initiative developed jointly by Colombia and Germany, in which the University of Potsdam, Universidad de Caldas, Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Cali, and ASCUN also have worked together since 2019 to build up capacities in the areas of quality, digitalization, and management in higher education. So thank you so much for being with us once again. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce our first lecturer of this session. And for that, let me introduce to our first speaker, who is the Professor Lina Gonzalez. She's working since 2008 at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences of Pontifical Javerian University. Also, she received her master's degree in political science from the University of Los Andes in Colombia, and her areas of expertise are social and political sciences. And also, Professor Lina is conducting her research in field of theory and practice of international relations in peace building and gender area. This is a topic very interesting for us and also for the comparison and the initiatives in Colombia and Germany. So, Professor Lina, thank you so much for being with us, and it's an honor to have you as part of the HEPCoPa Lecture Series today.
Thank you very much, Rafael. Thank you for all the audience. Good morning for everybody. And it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And when you say, we can start.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll share with you a PowerPoint, and please wait. Okay. Can you confirm us?
Yeah, okay. We can see your presentation. So yes. Yeah, that's the slide. Probably full mode of the screen.
Yes. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. I need to announce you that I am going to read my presentation. I'm feel better if I can read my paper, and if you can listen, please confirm me.
Yeah, we are listening to you very well, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, begin. This first, after begin my paper, I have to announce you that this research is a research financed by Javeriana University, and it becomes a achievement of the results of this research, and it's for me a pleasure to present the conclusions of this research. Is in between 2015 to 2018, and this is the results of the research. I on 2017 go to London to the Conference of International Relations to present the the results of the research, and nowadays it's a pleasure to present for you. Okay, begin. Women as a peace builders. Through this exercise, an attempt will be, excuse me. Okay, excuse me, my phone is, okay. Through this essay, an attempt will be made to make visible the work of the International Network of the Women in Black, henceforth WV, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the work of Women International Courts as a political practice will be shown as a well, focusing in the work into generating a collective identity, becoming truthfully a peace-building space, rescuing in this way the symbolic value of their practice, consisting in peaceful resistance as a political scenarios that serve to a pedagogical and healing purposes. Feminist ideology, the new social movement's identity, and the construction of peace. The feminist approach to science inquires on the ways in which gender influence, excuse me. Okay. The feminist approach to science inquires on the ways in which gender influence the comprehension of the scientific phenomena from the conceptualization of knowledge to the different research practice according to the feminist. There are certain notions of and procedures within the production process of knowledge and systematically results in the disadvantage to women and to other groups that they are found in a position of subordination. Thus, the primary purpose of the feminist ideology is the production of knowledge that contributes to the interests of those subordinate groups in their search of power. According to Anderson 29, from the feminist ideology is the argument that the domination knowledge practice put women into the disadvantage. This can be observed when the women are excluded from the research whenever theories that denigrate their feminist forms are produced. When theories are elaborated that project women as inferior and that produce knowledge that does not result to be useful to subordinate groups, or that serves to the purpose of reinforcing all social heritages. With the objective of converting the subordinate position of women in advantage, the feminist ideology attempts to develop the notion of the situation expert, and that of the situated knowledge. Thus are notions to contribute to the objective of feminist studies in as much as that they produce knowledge reflecting the particular perspective of the subject, specifically of women as excluded and subordinated subjects capable of comprehending this phenomenon and in this way making a contribution toward the building of a vision different to the tradition of a scientific research. One of the central concepts of the feminist theories is that of a gender. Scott, 1987, asserts that this is one of the primary forms of power relationships, configuring social relationships from the very distinctions of sexes, such as differentiation is a primarily undertaken in four ways. First, by means of the symbols and myths available in the culture serving of the purpose of represented. Second, through the normative concepts that manifest the ways in the which of different meanings of those symbols are interpreted, and that aim at reaffirming the meaning of the masculine and feminine. And third, through the social institutions and organizations permitting to the relation of gender as, for example, the kinship system, the family, and the identity. Gender implies a social and historical construction of sexual differentiation, since such as differentiation is not basis of the biologic difference between human beings, which are represented in a collection of practices, ideas, and discourses. Within this train of thought, and according to Conway, Burke, and Scott, 1887, the production of norms that are culturally appropriated for the masculine culture is a central function of the social authority, and it is mediated by the broad spectrum of institutions. This can be of an economic, political, social, and religious character. The norms are characterized by being explicit but being transmitted as an implicit way through language and symbols. It followed that it is a configuration process of a symbolic order of society, the context in which the imaginaries of what men and women must be are constructed. This become one of the frontiers that differentiate both sex and that are useful to different functions of a politic, economic, and social character. The gender sex system are the collection of a social practices, symbols, representations, norms, and values that societies elaborate from the sexual, anatomical, and physiological difference, and that grant sense to the satisfactions of sexual impulse to reproduction of the human species and the way in which people related to each other. De Barbieri, 1893, the identification of a gender category is found as a base of belonging to determinate social groups. This concept is used by Van Dyck in his work Ideology and a Multidisciplinary Approach. In this work, the author inquires about the relationships between ideology and social groups. According to this author, a social group must be related relatively permanent, organized or institutionalized, and it reproduces through the requirements of member according to the identification with a collection of specific properties, more or less permanent, as with objectives, activities, norms, and shared values, resource, and specific position related to the other social groups. Social groups develop a group identity, which can be defined in terms of the social representations. There that are common characteristics in the members of the group. These include in the collection of routines, clothing, physical events, objects, places, symbols, historical events, heroes or heroines, with which the members of the group identify themselves. This identity is framed in the term within a social identity that makes reference to the self-representation as a members of a social group. And it implies a certain comprehension of a sum of specific objectives, norms, and values that are shared as a group. It follows that the identity of a group has cognitive dimension that makes reference to the social representation that are shared by the members of a determined group. Differently worded, it makes reference to specific and organized collections of beliefs that configure context models with which the discourse is produced. These mental models, according to Van Dyck 2000, represent that is defined by the participants of a social situation as a relevant. This is why the author argues that the influence of gender in the language is given by means of the more or less conscious and subjective representation of the social identities with the context models. The group that have their identity anchored to gender, ethnicity, or sexuality are different to the classic social movements for they don't respond to their prototype. Their labor movement, this is the way they are framed in the theory of the new social movements. The new social movements theory born in Europe as a response to the lack of the indefiniteness of Marxism in understanding those social movements that emerged after the 60s. These new social movements exhibit transformations logics based on politics, ideology, and culture as another source of identity, which results in the subject enjoying even more relevance. According to Terrain, the main characteristics of these new social movements is that they seek to give back social economy and political participation to those who have been deprived of this, thus become visible actors capable of expressing their ideas. One of the main authors of this theory is Alberto Melucci, who argues that the surge of the information society is paralleled with the transformation of the social conflicts that leads social and personal identity of the individuals to become the central point of the reference. And in the generation of social actions from the perspective of the author, within the new social movements, the claim of the personal identity substitutes that of classical social movements that is based upon of the property of the means of production. In this way, elements such as a time and a space of the life in general, motivation, and codes of daily conducts become irrelevant of action movements according to Berrio. 2006. Melucci, 1995, understands the concept of collective identity as a cognitive process in which ends, means, and field action are defined, and in which different elements of collective actions are incorporated. These are defined with a group-specific language and are incorporated in a determinate collection of ritual practices, allowing to the group cost and benefits calculation. He also stressed the importance of the collective identity, form the securing of a community continuity and permanence of the moment throughout time. As for the establishment of the limits of social actor in his context, Paulette and Jasper understand collective identity as the emotional, connective, and moral connection of the individual to community, to a category, to a practice, or to an institution. Different worded collective identity is the real or imaginary perception resulting for the sharing and relationships on or certain status. This kind of identity is to be differentiated from personal identity and if finds expression in cultural elements such as narrative symbols, verbal style, and practices. According to these authors, collective identity is a notion that has incidence in various aspects of those social movements, such as their emergence, requirements, and compromise, and the election of the strategies and their success. Speaking of the surge of the social movements, it is to be highlighted the role played by culture in the configuration process of identity and in the way this constitution the base of the most important claims of this new social movement. Referring to requirement and compromise, Paulette and Jasper assert that the collective identity does not always precede the source of the movement. They argued that in the case of the woman movements, this lacked of the institutional infrastructure that served in the past for the members of the other groups to establish a daily contact that allowed the merge of a collective identity. To the contrary, in case of the woman in its organizations, that the ones that have propinated the formation of collective identity that have later of allowed the formation network to be used for the requirement of new members. Identity plays a very important role, not only concerning the adhesion for people to the group, and thus contributing to its progress around common interest, but also in the guaranteeing to the necessary solidarity and compromise that add durability to the movement. In this sense, identity is related to the sense of injustice and with the agency to clearly distinguish of the us from opponents and sympathizers. This requires the reaffirmation of the collective identity by means of rituals and of the adequate management of the difference within the movement. Concerning to the choice of the strategies within the movement, identity is of relevance. The authors assert that those strategies that are considered to be good by the group are relative with symbolic elements with which the movement is associated and with the form in which the movement differentiates itself from the other groups and reaffirm its collective identity. Considering what has been discussed above, the concept is fundamentally in order to comprehend the way in which the movement operates as far as it influences the orientation of the different collective actions and determines the action as a frame with this take place. The Women Pacific Route, Ruta Pacífica de las Mujeres, in Colombia as a social group is framed within a collective identity. This is anchored in the gender category upon which the claims of the feminist movement are developed. In turn, gender allows the building of a group identity, which is a criterion to belong to a group, and from which share social form, social representation, and configured by the members of the group, language, symbols, values, and beliefs, this influence in the collective actions of the group. According to Amparan and Gallegos, the results of a process that combines three elements. First, the purpose and orientation of the social actors. Second, the resources that are found in the fields of action and that are used by the actors themselves to implement their purpose. And finally, the limits in the terms of a spectrum of opportunities offered to the social actors. Bourdieu argues that symbols are the quintessential instruments of knowledge and communication that make possible the conscience about the sense of the social world. which contributes to the reproduction of the social order. In the opinion of the author, symbol systems undertaken an imposition function of legitimation of the domination, which contributes to securing the domination of some others. This is known as a symbol violence. Taking in consideration this is the possible to take about a cultural symbolization of a sexual difference. In other words, it is possible to say that in society there are social representation about what men and women must be. The elements defining what is to be considered feminine and masculine, which are symbolic constructions concerning this point, as Marta Lamas asserts that the relevant role undertaken by the difference between sex constituted an almost cosmic foundation of subordination, even of a woman oppression. According to this author, the interweaving of symbolization is drawn of anatomic reproductive issues. Although, as mentioned by the author, symbolics and discourse multiply the legitimate gender distinction based on a sexual difference, and woman's subordination is associated to it. These two elements can be used to subvert the patriarchal logic that is present in society, both in the way we interact and in the privileged patterns of communication. In this sense, Van Dyck argues that through discourse language, users can make, confirm, or defy society and political structure of institution. In this one of the objectives of the Pacific Route, it aims at breaking the patriarchal logic of war for the transformation of language from the use of symbols and discourse that given a new significance by identity of gender to make statements against war and for peace building. En this text, Construyendo la Paz, Reconciliación Sostenible en Sociedades Divididas, Lederach presents a typology of actors and approach of peace building. The author distinguishes three levels of pyramid. At the top of it, he puts the high-level leaders of these include those of political, military, and religious character. To this level corresponds the peace-building approach are the focus of high-profile negotiation, which are the features by being excluded but considerable recognized mediator that generally seeks ceasefire. At the intermediate level are found those ethics, religious, intellectual, academic, of humanitarian leaders which enjoy the respect of broad sector of societies. These leaders develop workshops on problem solving, on conflict resolution, and on the peace commission. At the base of the pyramid, there are those basis leaders which make up of the local peace commissions, native NGOs, leaders, community promoters, among others. Peace-building approach in this level are the local peace commission, their formation of the basis, the reduction of prejudice, and psychosocial work over war trauma. These leaders are characterized, according to this author, by enjoying a lesser decision power as compared with the broadly known personality at the upper level, notwithstanding the fact that they have to face in the greater degree the consequence of the decisions that are taken as the spheres. Those initiatives that surge from both sectors of the populations have been victims of a direct form of violence, and that usually face difficulties to further in this process of peace building due to a lack of financial resources emerge at bottom level. At this level, the Women Pacific Route is found, and it is a base organization that was found on the 25th of November in 1996. Drawn for the mobilization to the Mutatá municipality located in the Antioquia, Urabá in Colombia, the march to this municipality was motivated by the knowledge of grave humanitarian rights violations, as well as by the multiple massacres that took place between 1993 and 1995 in this region. The purpose of the march was to show solidarity with the women that had been victims of violence. This group is defined as follows as a feminist movement that works from the negotiation of an armed conflict in Colombia for the internet in the intention of making visible the effects of war over the lives of women and for the enforceability of the rights of true justice and reparation and the reconstruction of the individual and collective historic movement, a memory for no repetition. In 2011, the Woman Pacific Route becomes a node of the Woman in Black. That meeting takes time in the place every 2 years in some of the places of the network of the Woman in Black. In that year, it was organized in Bogota from the first time in America continent. Afterwards, in this book, Imagination Moral, el arte y el alma de construir la paz, by Lederach, looks into the notion of peace building, understanding this as a constructive transformation of the conflict. The central element in the process was the author denominates moral imagination, which is composed of four elements. First, of the relation in the interdependency, which makes reference to the capacity of individuals and communities to imagine themselves as a network of relationships, even with their enemies. Second, of respecting the complexity of reality and avoiding popularization. This implies to stop think in dualist terms and being capable to see beyond the violent confrontation. And third, of providing for the space for creativity act is not only necessary to believe that both innovation and creativity are possible conflict scenarios where destructive patterns are enrooted, but also to allow the unexpected to surge in order to achieve transformation. Finally, they will to risk. Moral imagination generates constructive initiatives from the breaking of the cycles of violence. For this to happen, it must achieve to connect and mobilize the networks of the social relationships that already exist in the conflict scenarios or to wave relation networks through relation space. These are understood by Lederach as those spaces for interaction within which points of relation can be found that cross over the lines of the conflict. This is fundamental to the generation of positive transformation in conflicts due to two reasons. On one hand, because it allows to surge as a reconciliation process, and on the other hand, because it attempts to transform hostile relationships into interdependent and just ones. The importance of weaving interdependent networks of relationships in conflict scenarios is explained by the fact that this allows facing the central elements and of the problem according to the author, in not only the most destructive expression of it. In his opinion, the approach to the building of peace normally are focused in achieving agreements of key points such as ceasefire, the rending of arms, among other, but leaving aside the relational context where the epicenter of the confrontation is found. Hence, the traditional approach are usually insufficient, for they not get to generate constructive social change that are sustainable. The network approach proposes bilateral centers in attention in the creation of social tissue, relationship and relation space, the three elements that must be taken into consideration when building construction social change in violence scenarios as first, the comprehension of the social geography. Differently worded, the identification of strategy points that serve the purpose of connecting groups of people, processes in the places of generation of change. Second, to think about intersections and to take into consideration those places where the intersection of relationship take place and to build access to allow the connection of the people with different mentalities and situations. Third, to be ingeniously flexible, to capable of adapting to the change and of generation innovated response capable of defined existence patterns. The key for the building of peace is found in the reconstruction of the social tissue in order to maintain social change. Hence, in the ultimate end in the reconciliation of society for that purpose is so to repair the previously broken relationship and to establish new forms of interaction that no longer recur to violence as the form expression as means to resolve conflicts. The language, specifically that of the discourse and symbols, are useful to transform the structures that perpetuate violence cycles and hostility relationships in conflict scenarios. The utilization of both generates ruptures process with the existing patterns and promotes new ones that allow the transformation of those scenarios. The central point of this change is found in the establishment of positive relation and the use to the dialogue resolve. I'm not extend my presentation. The origin of the evolution of network and women in black is a little long, and I jump this part and go to the conclusions. This is a little short scenarios of the network. The woman in blacks participates in different countries: Yugoslavia, Italy, Spain, Colombia, and Italy, Colombia, and I'm going to be the conclusion. As a consequence, the Women in Black network can be considered to be an entity with peacebuilding functions, for it's configured as a sum of scenarios from justice through visualization and above all one for the establishment of foundations for the prevention and no repetition. In this way, the operations of both networks can be understood at least for sense. In first place, they manifest themselves as political scenarios where the diverse political actors are questioned. Likewise, secondly, with them, impunity is made visible and denounced in the order to create and recreate situations of gender inequality that are expressed through deeds of physical, economic, and symbolic violence against women. Thirdly, this network can to be considered as a pedagogical scenarios where set the nodes that visualization led simultaneously to the internationality of searching for the reparation and for the formation collectively historical memory. This is particularly important concerning collective historical memory, within a conceptualization piece of a peace culture. It turns the deeds of words are tolerant today into tolerate ones, untolerate ones, taking the promulgation and the symbolic mandate in front of the word actors, thus arguing the further permanent search for the creation of prevention strategies. And lastly, the networks can be seen as a healing scenarios in within the construction of a space under the condition of solidarity, gains the character of the ritual that favors for the symbolic effectiveness to face the traumatic effects of war over women. In the end, this process converged into a profound transformation of every one of the members of the network into a citizens, but also citizens, and in this way, transformation the collective identity of the group to which they belong and transforming in turn the societies were inhabited. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Professor Elena, thank you so much for this interesting presentation. This is very important for us because, as you know, we are trying to know more the scope about the SDGs, and gender equality is one of the most important tasks that probably we have now in Colombia. And also, we have the opportunity to know more and to obtain more insights from different countries around the world, in the case of Germany and also other ones. So, thank you so much for the interesting reflection about this. We have a question, Professor Lina, from Jinjan Wan, and said, are the components in a collective identity, such as values, changeable throughout the time?
I think yes. I think the identity is not a stone. It's dynamic. It's dynamic, and the identity, the personal identity, and also the collective identity, transform as well as the time pace and the experience apports, and of course the context change in the different places.
Hmm? Well, thank you so much, Professor Lina. A second question, and to end this interesting Q&A session related to your lecture, some advice that you can share with us as responsibles in universities to achieve more levels and to increase the opportunity of gender equalities. Some practical or also research activities that you can advise from your experience to increase that.
I think that the universities has to support the initiatives of the students. I think that they are not come from the institution, because more of the initiatives of the students are enough to improve this kind of search and research, and become an interesting, a collective interesting, because I think the if the institution impose some initiatives, it becomes it not becomes better. I think that the initiatives should be from the students. Or also, for example, they can and they have to support the research and the initiatives in this kind of area.
Definitely, we have to work together, and we have a lot of work to do. So I think this kind of experiences prior the application of new opportunities in universities could be very helpful for us. Professor Lina, thank you so much for being with us, and also for share this interesting experience in terms of inequality, and also the opportunity of achieve more gender actions in Colombia and also in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all for listening to my research.
Thank you. Our best wishes for the future. So in this moment, we can move in. We are moving to the second lecture of the day. This is another important topic because through the SDGs, as I said before, we are trying to reduce inequalities, but also to compare the very good experiences from one country to another one to reduce that barriers, and also trying to support more research and more practical opportunities in this context. So, to talk about inequality and poverty, I want to present to the second lecturer of the day, the professor Dr. Roland Baiva. He holds the chair of inequality research and social stratification analysis at the Faculty of Economics and Social Sciences since March of 2019 in the University of Potsdam. And his main research topics are social inequality, Europeanization, labor market, immigration, change of principles, values, and quality of life and urban change. So this is a very important approach that also we can have the opportunity to know more today. So it's an honor for me to present Dr. Roland, and thank you so much for being with us in this HEPCoPa Lecture Series.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and thank you also to all people involved to organize this lecture series. It's my first YouTube talk. I'm quite excited, to be honest.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity for being with us.
Okay, now I have to start my presentation, and you would let me know if things don't work out right. Can you see my first slide here at the moment?
In this moment, we are looking very well your first slide.
Okay, perfect. So that's the title of my lecture today. Inequality and Poverty, a comparison light of selected European and Latin American countries. And well, as you just said, next 25 minutes, maybe 27 minutes, will be on inequality mainly in various dimensions which are crucial in that research area and this reality of our societies. So social inequalities are a central topic of social science research, and I'm 100% sure that you're well aware of that, and also of the socio-political discourse in all modern societies across the globe. This is reflected in a large number of publications on inequality issues, for example, in the field of education, the labor market, poverty, gender relations, migration, or housing. But the topic of inequality is also being discussed intensively under various headings in the leading international media and in the public sphere. I had a look at various international news organizations during my preparation for this presentation. The Guardian, for example, recently discussed raising the minimum wage in the UK and argued for a higher tax rate for upper income households. That's a very unique argument, in my view, for the British society. Le Monde criticized the strongly growing hyper-concentration of wealth during the COVID pandemic. I Katimerini, a leading Greek newspaper, condemned that university education in Greece is largely monopolized by the higher and middle income strata to the expense of students who come from lower income families. El País, and even the conservative Frankfurter Allgemeine from Germany featured several articles recently, and that high inflation rates unproportionately hurt the lower classes. This is the twofold background for this presentation, which discusses several key dimensions of social inequality in selected member states of the European Union and also Latin American countries. Empirically, this analysis is based on time series data from the European Statistical Office, as well as based on data from the OECD and the World Bank. For the comparative analysis of this presentation and the underlying paper, various European and Latin American countries were selected for which data are available over a longer time period and which also embody different welfare state traditions, which is written down on this slide here. Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands, for example, represent the ideal type of a redistributive social democratic welfare state, according to Esping Andersen. Very famous analysis from the 1990s. Belgium, France, Germany, and Austria have a less redistributive conservative welfare state. Spain and Italy represent the Mediterranean welfare state, and the United Kingdom, the liberal welfare state in which redistribution is practiced to a comparatively low degree. The Czech Republic, Slovenia, and Hungary represent an Eastern European welfare state with relatively strong redistributive capacities. Well, the counterexample is Romania and Latvia in Eastern Europe, in which a neoliberal understanding of the economy and relatively stark social inequalities can be observed. And this notion of a neoliberal economy and a relatively weak social welfare state would also apply, in my opinion, for Latin American countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, which play a role in my talk today to some extent. This is my first empirical slide, and well, let me briefly talk a little bit about the numbers you see here. Over the past 3 decades, the European Statistical Office, as well as also the World Bank and other organizations, OECD, have built up extensive data that allow to map very different aspects of social change, especially of inequality structures, in a comparative way. In many cases, the comparative view, at least for analysis which is taking part in Europe, research on European integration, for example, the comparative view has been linked to the question of long-term inner European convergence, because one fundamental expectation was in the past that the process of European integration would trigger catching up processes, especially in the economically weaker countries of Eastern and Central Europe. However, this expectation has so far been not completely fulfilled, although Europe presents itself as an island of prosperity in a global comparison. A prosperity gap and economic and social inequalities within Europe are still considerable, as a number of studies argue. This, so if you want, is the starting point for the argumentation of this presentation. In the first step, Table 1 displays data on gross domestic product, labor force participation, and unemployment for a number of countries. And now observations for the time period between 1995, if available, and 2021. In terms of socioeconomic development, measured as gross domestic product and purchasing power parities, Denmark and the Netherlands have a per capita GDP of over 42,000 euros in 2021, which is well above the EU 27 average. For comparison, GDP in the United States, for example, was at $69,000 in that very year. It is around $19,000 US in China and around $7,000 in India, for example. At 39,000 euros, conservative welfare states such as Belgium and Germany are also above the EU average, whereas countries with a Mediterranean and liberal welfare states such as Spain or the UK have a below average per capita, considering the intra-European comparison here. It is interesting to note, in my view, that the differences in GDP between countries with a Mediterranean or liberal welfare state on the one hand and countries with a social democratic welfare state on the other hand, they are much less pronounced in the mid-1990s than it is currently the case. For example, liberal Britain has declined over the last 25 years with a below average GDP growth, while social democratic oriented societies have experienced a further upswing in socioeconomic development levels. Eastern European EU countries such as Romania and Latvia have a significantly lower level of prosperity, with GDPs of around 23,000 to 25,000 euros, which is a little bit above the level of the Latin American countries under study here. Nevertheless, there has been a catching up process within Europe over the last years, most clearly in Slovenia and the Czech Republic, which reached it GDP per capita levels of more than 29,000 euros in 2021. In terms of labor force participation, strong differences can be observed as well, even if most European countries experienced a growth of the labor market during the last 2 decades. Labor force participation reached an average of almost 74% in the EU 27 on average, which is higher than in the US, for example. They have a level of about 60%. China and India have 71 and 51% labor force participation, according to the World Bank. Labor force participation is the highest in social democratic welfare states at roughly 80 to 84% in 2021, and it is much lower in countries like Italy and Romania, around 65%, which is comparable with respect to labor force participation rates in Latin American countries, I believe. A specifically strong increase in labor force participation over time can be observed in the Netherlands, Spain, and Hungary, but it actually declined in Romania during the last 2 decades, which is due to massive immigration of working age population to other European countries and additional demographic factors such as aging of the population and shrinking of birth rates. In terms of unemployment, another key dimension of social inequality structures, one can observe a slightly different pattern since all European countries experienced a decline. This decline in unemployment was especially strong in Poland, Germany, and the Netherlands, leading to near full employment in these countries as well as in the Czech Republic, with unemployment rates between 3 and 4% in 2021. However, unemployment remains a major problem in countries like Spain, Italy, France, and Sweden, which have significantly above average unemployment rates, especially among the youth. For example, youth unemployment in Spain was at 27% and in Italy at 22% in 2021, and therefore clearly above the national average. The expansion of the labor market in European societies, as just discussed on the basis of the data in Table 1, is mainly due to a sharp increase in the labor market participation of women. That's an important talking point in my presentation. As it has been studied in a large number of publications in recent years. As you can see on this slide, there's much more stability in labor force participation of men in the period. For example, women's labor market participation in Sweden increased from 73%, already a quite high level, to 81% between 2000 and 2021. Over the same period, it rose from 63 to 77% in Germany, from 68 to 77% in Latvia. The strongest relative increase can be observed for Hungary for this period, from 52% to 71%. This development has direct consequences for the wages in the labor market, especially since the educational aspirations of women in European societies have increased to a substantial degree as well. You will see that in a minute on slide number 9. However, in connection with fair payment of work, the still existing pay gap between men and women has been discussed in the public sphere quite intensively in European societies. At the same time, it is closely examined in many scientific publications and linked to apparent social critique. In this context, 2 things are worth noting. First, in basically all European societies, there's still a clear difference in the pay of women and men, even if one controls for the different extent of men's and women's employment by using hourly wages, as it happened in this figure. As of 2021, the European average gender pay gap is at 13%, and this is quite low in international comparison. One has to note that. The US, for example, has a gender pay gap of 16%, China 32%, India also 32%. But it is much higher, I found that very interesting, than in Argentina, 6%, Brazil 9%, Colombia 4%, and Mexico at 12%. In Europe, the gender pay gap is most pronounced in countries like Latvia, the UK, and Austria, with a gender pay gap of around 20% in 2021. Second, the gender pay gap has been shrinking in almost all of Europe between 2000 and 2020 by 3 percentage points on average in the EU 27. This decline in the gender pay gap is most evident in Eastern European countries such as Poland, Slovenia, and Romania. However, Belgium and the Netherlands have also made great strides in this area. The decline in unemployment, the increase in labor force participation, and the shrinking gender pay gap correspond with strong changes in educational participation and educational inequality, which can be discussed in 3 different levels in the context of this paper. First, a strong increase in the share of population with tertiary education can be observed for all European states as one key element of recent societal change and the establishment of a knowledge-based economy. Slide number 8 shows the tertiary education rates of the age group between 30 and 34 as an example. On average, tertiary education in this age group has almost doubled in the EU 27 on average between 2000 and 2020 from 22% to 41%. This expansion of tertiary education is particularly pronounced in Central Eastern European countries such as Poland and Slovenia, where far fewer than 20% of this age group had a university degree in 2000, which is similar to the level of tertiary education in the Latin American countries, which I use for my light comparison here. In the meantime, the share of tertiary education has risen in these Eastern European countries to 42 to 44%. The currently highest tertiary education rates can be observed in France, the Netherlands, and Great Britain, where approximately half or even more than half of the 30 to 34-year-olds have a university degrees. These are countries that already had an above-average tertiary education rate in that age group at the turn of the century. Second observation can be made for the tertiary degrees of men and women, which you see here on the left-hand side of this slide. The data in this table shows that even more women now successfully complete universities than we already saw in 2000, which is another important change in the social fabric of European society, as there are now 134 female graduates for every 100 male graduate on average in the EU 27, especially in Central Eastern European countries, such as Poland, Hungary, Slovenia, the Czech Republic, and Latvia. Higher education seems to be a female domain, with well above 50% more female than male graduates. The expansion of tertiary education in these countries is mainly driven by rising educational aspirations of women. I really tried quite hard to find comparable data for Colombia and also the other Latin American countries, and I was not so lucky to find data which are directly comparable. However, the publications I found indicate that also in these countries, young women are more likely to attain tertiary education than men these days, but I'm sure we will discuss this later on a little bit. Okay. Overall, these observable gender dynamics within higher education in Europe could have a further impact on social inequalities in the future. That would be another important argument, I think, possibly leading to an additional decrease of the gender pay gap or a further reduction of female unemployment, for example. A third indicator for the restructuring of social inequalities in the realm of education is the changing share of early early school leavers in Europe, which has steadily decreased over the last 2 decades from 19% in the year 2000 to approximately 10% in 2021. Compared with the year 2000, all EU member states reported a smaller proportion of early school leavers in 2021, except for the Czech Republic and Sweden, which experienced a small increase for that period. This goes hand in hand with a convergence of early school leaver rates due to the fact that a number of countries with very high rates in 2000, for example, the Netherlands or Belgium, were able to reduce this problem through social interventions in the educational system. Despite these positive developments, the latest data show in Romania, Spain, and Italy a comparatively high proportion of young people that still leave the educational system early, with rates between 13 and 15%. However, in Latin American countries, early school leaver rates are higher than it is the case in the EU. Directly comparable data was not available to me, but this could be also something which we discuss later on. In addition to the changes in the educational system and with regard to educational participation that have just been discussed, demographic factors, especially a further increase in immigration, are crucial for an understanding of changing social inequality structures in Europe. The number of migrants moving to a member state of the EU is much higher than in the past. This table compiles a huge number of different key figures on immigration. Quite surely cannot address all of them. In 2020, there were about 4 million immigrants in that year, both individuals from EU countries as well as from non-EU countries. In comparison, this number was at approximately 2.5 million immigrants in the year 2000. Currently, the most important immigration countries are Germany, the UK, Spain, France, and Italy. Until 2014, it was mainly EU citizens from Romania, Bulgaria, and the Baltic states who migrated to these countries. In 2015, there's a change since there was a sharp increase in immigration from regions with armed conflicts in Levant, Africa, and Asia, which led to a doubling of net immigration in Germany, for example. However, the development of immigration has not been uniform within Europe over the past 2 decades, starting from a relatively moderate level in the year 2000. Some countries experienced a strong increase in immigration, for example, Hungary and Poland. In this process, former emigration countries, such as Italy and Poland, are becoming new immigration countries. The highest average immigration calculated against the size of the population has been experienced in the last 10 years by countries such as Belgium, Austria, Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, where annual immigration represent a share of approximately 1% of their total population. It is important to mention that this increase in immigration within the last 10 years is also due to growing mobility within the European Union. Prime examples are countries such as Austria, Belgium, and Germany, where between 42 and 62% of all migrants come from another EU country. This is the second column from the right in this table. Well, hold on, was the next slide. This immigration dynamic, which I talked about just a minute ago, of the last 2 decades has led to characteristic changes of the migration stock within the population of European society. This slide shows the share of the population with foreign citizenship, and the massive differences which continue to exist here within Europe. Austria, Sweden, Belgium, and Germany, for example, have a relatively high proportion of foreign citizens, around 20%, while they account for less than 4% in Eastern European countries such as Romania and Poland, which would be about the level of countries like Colombia and Argentina. These differences can primarily be attributed to different migration policies of the past and historical developments. Almost all European countries have experienced an increase in the proportion of foreigners in their population within the last 10 years. This has mostly pronounced in Germany, Sweden, and Austria. These changes in the labor market, education, and migration have greatly altered the social structures of European societies in recent years. At the same time, income inequality and poverty is increasing in many societies, as it is displayed on this and the next slide. The data in this figure shows the Gini index for various European countries, and it is at 0.0 for the EU 27 on average in 2021, which indicates a moderate level of household income inequality compared to the rest of the world. The US, for example, has a Gini index for the household income inequality of 0.50, South Africa even 0.63. It should be noted that the Gini index is based on household incomes that already take welfare transfers into account. Due to the comparatively comprehensive social policies in Europe, this circumstance leads to a relatively strong reduction in existing social inequalities. And that is an important argument, I think, which one has to make here. The highest inequality of household income within Europe can currently be observed in Latvia and Romania. Still, the level in Latin America would be much higher, I think, while Slovenia and Belgium, with a Gini index of 0.23 and 0.24, show the lowest inequality. The strongest increase in inequality between 2000 to 2021 is observed in Germany from 0.25 to 0.31, a country where unemployment has fallen sharply due to the neoliberal labor market reforms of 2004, so-called Hartz IV reforms, but where low-wage employment and wage inequality have increased massively over the course of the last 15 years. The counterexample is countries like Belgium, the Netherlands, and the Czech Republic, some of which have seen a significant reduction in household income inequality over the past 20 years. Finally, the last empirical analysis in this paper concerns the development of poverty risks in Europe, which developed much more dynamic than the previously discussed household income inequality. The average poverty risk in the EU 27, the threshold is at 60% of the national median. Disposable income is currently just under 17%, which means that at least 75 million Europeans out of 44.7 million Europeans are currently affected. Due to the ongoing corona crisis and the war in the Ukraine, at the time of the writing of this article, this number is likely to be significantly higher, but there's no data available yet on the effects of that. For comparison, again, using that threshold, the US would have a poverty at risk rate of roughly 30%, similar to Mexico, interestingly. Poverty is most pronounced in Latvia, Romania, and Spain, where between 22 and 23% of the people are currently at a risk of poverty. The lowest risk can be observed for the Czech Republic with 8.6%. A proportionally very large increase in poverty risk has been experienced by wealthy societies such as Germany and the Netherlands between 2000 and 2021, but also by less prosperous countries such as Romania and Latvia. This is my concluding slide. Well, try to wrap up the findings of my presentation. I think one can argue that the empirical analysis of this paper have indeed shown that within Europe there are still marked inequalities in the labor market, in education and immigration, and in household income inequality, and with regard to poverty risks. Nevertheless, trends towards at least a partial convergence within Europe with regard to those inequality dynamics cannot be overlooked, in my opinion. This concerns, among other things, the reduction of the gender pay gap, the equalization of unemployment risks, the expansion of tertiary education, or the increasing educational aspirations of women. In the area of immigration, the differences within Europe have tended to widen, in my opinion. At any rate, they have not narrowed. In my view, the increase of poverty risks in many European societies over the last 2 decades is a cause for concern. It is certainly true that poverty risks are still much lower than in many other countries outside of Europe. At the same time, it must be assumed, as I already argued, that the current data available cannot be used to depict the social consequences of the current societal crisis, which is due to Corona and also the war in the Ukraine. Thank you very much for your time.
Dr. Roland, thank you so much for this interesting scope. I think that is such a very great research and also a good opportunity to show different probably perspectives that is very related to this scope, no? In terms of poverty, inequality, and also social impact. There are topics that are truly related to SDGs, and it's very important to reflect about it, not only in a separate mode, but also combining and mixing different options and point of views. We have a question, Dr. Roland, from Joachim Haffer from the University of Potsdam, and the first one is about, if we compare inequality indicators by country, does this imply that we should then learn something from the successful countries, and how could this be done?
Well, the question is quite interesting and important, and my answer would be yes, of course, we can learn something from the more successful countries. And the prime example for social interventions and the successful reduction of inequalities in the past would be the Nordic countries in Europe, those countries which have a social democratic welfare states such as Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Norway. They've been quite successful over a very long period in reducing inequalities. This is, for example, also not only a task which for which the welfare state itself is responsible. It is also due to the fact that they have a very specific tax code in these countries, which with quite high taxes for those people who are better off. I try to phrase this as diplomatic as possible. Of course, this is something which we should learn from, in my opinion. That's maybe bad news for those who are well off, and I'm assuming in this audience are people from affluent households, but that's the solution, at least the Nordic countries used in the past. They also, for example, have the idea that education, and we talked about education earlier in the first part of this lecture, that education is for free on all levels. They try to lower the barriers for access to tertiary education, and they are quite successful in incorporating people from lower social classes into the educational system, into the specifically into universities, etc. So yes, we can learn from that, I'm sure. And if you look at the GDPs, which I presented on purpose just in the beginning of my lecture, you learn from that the prime example for a liberal society in Europe, the UK, is not doing so well, which is indicated by a huge number of factors. Look at the health system in this country. Look at the labor force participation of men, it's decreasing. This is a country with a huge problem with regard to inequalities, and the public infrastructure is broken, etc. So that's not the way to go, I think. That's my answer. I hope this somehow helps. Yeah.
Thank you. Helpful. And a second question, Dr. Roland, could you please explain again how the selection of these indicators comes about?
The election of the indicators I use today. You mean,
Yeah.
I wrote a paper over the summer using the opportunity to present myself here. Well, that's one reason, a very practical one. And this is, I invested quite heavily in today's presentation, so to speak. And I tried to come up with indicators, for which data is available over a longer time period. Well, that is one very practical reason. And then I think the material I presented, the indicators I presented, are very useful, in my opinion, to characterize key dimensions of social inequality. So I have not only a practical reason, I have also a reason related to the content I want to discuss. So if you talk about inequality, education is important. I talked about that. If you want to talk about inequality structures, you have to talk about immigration, I think. If you want to talk about inequality structures and how they change over time, you have to talk about the labor market, of course, and I did that as well. So I hope that is convincing as an answer. But yes, of course, I mean, there are always other indicators available. I choose those, and I hope that I made a quite convincing decision on that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm agree. There are a lot of dimensions to measure, but probably it will be very helpful having in mind a research like this to add in a second moment, or also to strengthen the scope using different measures also related to SDGs and many other. But it's a very important base and also an important background for the start of a follow-on opportunities in research of this interesting topic. Dr. Roland, once again, thank you so much for being with us in this HEPCoPa Lecture Series. It was an incredible presentation, and thank you so much also for the reflection and the scope for the opportunity to know more about the comparison between the countries in Latin America in comparison with the countries in Europe. I think that it's part of this interesting and also double-sided learning process that we are trying to do in this exercise between the University of Potsdam and us, and also to move that connections and that scope to the practical and the theoretical point. So I think that's a very good perspective to have in mind that we can learn together, and that's the plan of this kind of measures and also of tools. So thank you so much. And also Jinian one said that looking forward to the data analysis for 22 already. So there are a lot of expectations of the future of this scope.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Well, thank you so much to all the audience during this interesting presentation of the HEPCoPa Lecture Series. As each Wednesday, the invitation to be with us for the next Wednesday. We will have the closing lecture of our second season of the HEPCoPa Lecture Series to talk and know more about policy packages for complete decarbonization and also environmental issues. So thank you so much for being with us, and all of you totally invited to the next Wednesday. See you there.